Ezio Auditore did not feel fear when the sky tore open. He felt betrayal. The golden light split the air above the rooftops of Firenze without thunder, without warning, as if the heavens themselves had drawn a blade through reality. One moment he stood upon familiar stone, the scent of rain and old brick in the air, the weight of centuries whispering through the bones of the city. The next, the world fractured. There was no gentle passage, no dreamlike slipping between realms. The light seized him like a fist closing around bone. The air turned to fire. His breath burned in his lungs. The rooftops fell away, not downward but outward, stretching into impossible angles, shattering like glass of thought. He reached for his hidden blade by instinct alone, but the metal felt like a memory rather than a weapon. He was no longer falling. He was being pulled. Sound ceased to exist. Sight collapsed into a tunnel of gold and void. His body twisted in weightless agony, every nerve aflame, as if reality itself protested his presence in this transit. Visions battered his mind. Towering cities of black iron, oceans of skulls, banners stitched from flayed flesh, and cathedrals so vast they seemed to pierce invisible heavens. Beneath it all, a soundless scream, older than language, older than pity. Then abruptly, silence. He struck metal. Ezio's body slammed into a cold, perforated surface, the impact driving the breath from him in a violent exhale. He rolled instinctively, the training of years moving his limbs before his thoughts could catch up. The ground beneath him was not stone, not earth, but a mesh of iron shafts slick with unseen moisture. The air stank, burnt oil, rotting ozone, incense so thick it coated the back of his tongue like ash. Around him, darkness rose in jagged walls of corroded metal, dripping with slow, fetid condensation. Pipes wider than palaces ran overhead, coughing steam in coughing, rhythmic breaths, like some vast wounded beast drawing air. Ezio pushed himself to his feet. No stars watched over this place. Above him was not sky, but an endless lattice of skeletal frameworks and hanging chains, flickering with sallow, dying lumens. The ceiling stretched so far into shadow that distance became abstract. This was not a city. It was a wound cut into metal and inhabited by despair. He felt it then. The weight. This world pressed against the soul. The air itself carried despair, a pressure that invaded the mind like an unseen hand forcing thoughts into silence. It was a world without softness, without beauty, without hope. His muscles tensed, blade half extended into his palm. Somewhere, distant and echoing, came a sound, rhythmic and heavy, the slow march of machinery, or perhaps something else, accompanied by a hoarse mechanical chant that reverberated through the walls. Av, Imperator, Av, Imperator. The words were alien, yet they settled into his mind with disturbing familiarity. He moved forward, silent, every step measured, every breath shallow. The shadows felt thick, almost tangible, clinging to cloaks of rusted wiring and hanging chains. As he navigated narrow passages, the structure of the place revealed itself in pieces. Towering spires vanishing into darkness, shrines welded into walls, crumbling stone fused with adamantine steel. Skeletal remains lay in alcoves, some arranged with reverence, others discarded like broken tools. Then he saw them. Figures shuffled through a lower gantry, their bodies hunched, wrapped in filthy robes of faded crimson. Their faces were masked in iron and pneumatics, tubes crawling from their mouths into bulky packs strapped to their backs. They moved in terrified, obedient rhythms, dragging heavy carts of scrap and bone. One stumbled. A crack of sound like thunder. A figure stepped from the shadows, armored in blackened carapace, helm shaped like a skull twisted into something crueler. In its hands, a thick, brutal weapon of humming metal and grinding teeth. The stumbling worker barely had time to lift a hand. The blade tore them apart. Blood sprayed across rusted walls, dark and steaming. The body collapsed in twitching ruin, and no one screamed. No one wept. The others simply lowered their heads further and kept moving. Ezio's jaw tightened. This was not war as he understood it. This was not tyranny born from men. This was ritualized brutality, codified, sanctified. The armored figure paused. Its helm turned slowly. Ezio felt it. He had been seen. Their gaze met across the gap in iron and shadow. The warrior's weapon growled, teeth whining hungrily. The air thickened, as though reality itself held its breath. Ezio slid his hidden blade fully free, the familiar click grounding him for the first time since the sky had broken. Where am I? He wondered. But the world did not answer in words. It answered in violence. The armored giant stepped forward, raising its roaring weapon. And in that choking darkness, as the first sparks flew and the stench of blood thickened the air, Ezio realized something far more terrifying than being lost. This world did not know mercy, and it would not offer him any. What kind of abyss had claimed him? And could his creed survive a galaxy where only obedience endured? The blow that should have split Ezio in two missed him by the width of a prayer. The roaring weapon screamed past where his head had been a heartbeat earlier, teeth grinding against empty air and iron railings. Sparks burst like dying stars. He moved without thought, diving forward into the shadow tangle of hanging chains. The metal links clattered softly, swallowed by the endless industrial thunder of the hive. The armored figure growled through vox-distorted speakers, a noise like a beast choking on static. Ezio did not fight it. Not yet. He slid across the slick metal flooring, vaulted over a rusted conduit, and dropped silently into a lower maintenance shaft, moments before the weapon shredded the upper gantry into curling, molten scraps. Bolts of incandescent metal rained down behind him, hissing as they struck the filth-coated floor of the shaft. He lay still in the darkness and listened. The hive breathed. That was the only way to understand it. This place was not built. It was grown, welded upon itself over uncounted centuries, until it lived and suffered like a vast, dying organism. Steam coughed from vents like labored lungs. Ancient pistons slammed in rhythmic agony. Somewhere above, chains dragged massive weights through unseen chambers, the groans echoing like the bones of titans breaking. He rose slowly and began to move. The shaft opened into a massive vertical cavity, layers of platforms and bridges spiraling downward into a choking murk of fog and smog. Dim lumens flickered on fractured cables, casting sickly yellow halos. He climbed a ladder of corroded steel, emerging onto a broad walkway overlooking a lower district of the hive. What he saw stole even the thought of breath. A forest of towers stretched beyond sight, their surfaces layered with rusted balconies and broken shrines. Gargantuan statues of armored, faceless warriors loomed from the walls, their hands clutching massive, blunt swords as if guarding secrets long since rotted away. Stained glass windows, cracked and darkened by smoke, depicted a vast, skeletal figure seated upon a throne of wires and skulls, eyes blazing with imagined divinity. Far below, human shapes moved like insects through narrow alleys and open manufacturing yards. They were not citizens. They were survivors. Their robes were little more than caked rags. Their faces were hollow, eyes shining with the dull glaze of exhaustion and terror. Many wore iron masks bolted directly into their flesh, with tubes feeding something foul-smelling and chemical into their lungs. Children dragged metal scrap twice their weight. Above it all hung a sound. Prayer. Mechanical vox emitters mounted on rusting pylons hissed broken hymns into the air. Words looped endlessly like damaged prayers. Fragments of devotion, fragments of warning, fragments of fear. The sound rubbed against the mind, not gentle, but grinding. Ezio felt the weight deepen. This world did not merely crush the body, it crushed the spirit. He moved along the walkway, his steps ghost silent, cloak blending into the shadows. No one looked up. No one ever looked up. Looking up was dangerous. Looking up was hope, and hope had no place here. A tremor rolled through the metal beneath his boots, then another, then the sound of heavy boots. Ezio flattened against the wall as a patrol passed. 3 enforcers in flak armor and blackened helms, batons crackling with electric arcs. Their faces were hidden, their mouths replaced by vox grills that rasped out cold, practiced words. Unregistered movement logged in upper maintenance. Area remains quarantined. Continue purge. Purge. The word meant nothing to them. To this world, it was routine. Necessary. Holy. Slipped behind them, moved past them, became shadow again. This was when he first smelled it clearly. Burning incense. It rolled from a massive structure rising from the depths of the lower hive, a cathedral grown from iron and bone. Its spires were not built. They were fused vertebrae of colossal beasts, welded into arches that defied geometry. Massive censers swung from chains thicker than tree trunks, spilling clouds of scented smoke that barely masked the stench of decay and sweat. Ezio approached the edge of the walkway and looked down. A congregation filled the plaza before the cathedral. Thousands, tens of thousands. They knelt. Their foreheads rested against the stained metal ground as a solitary figure stood upon a raised platform. A priest encased in half-mechanized robes, his spine replaced by a steel frame, his eyes glowing with cold internal light. He raised a staff crowned with a skull wreathed in dull golden fire. His voice rolled outward through vox amplifiers. Rejoice, for you are not alone. Rejoice, for the Emperor endures. Rejoice, for your suffering is his miracle. The crowd did not cheer. They trembled. Faith here was not comfort. It was survival, a thin, cracking bone held between shattered teeth. Ezio's fingers tightened beneath his cloak. He had lived under tyrants. He had faced popes armored in lies and kings soaked in the blood of their own people. But this was different. This was a civilization that worshipped its chains. A sudden sound snapped through the air above him. Boots, heavy, armored. He turned just as a red targeting beam crawled across his chest, the dot pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat. From the darkness ahead, a taller figure emerged, its armor deeper black, etched with runes in silver. A long-barreled rifle rested against its shoulder, scope glinting with dull predatory light. Through filtered vox, a low voice spoke. Anomaly confirmed. You do not belong to this world. Ezio did not move. The cathedral bells began to toll, huge and hollow, shaking the air. The scope tightened. The red dot climbed toward his throat, and for the first time, Ezio wondered if escape from this world was even possible, or if he had already been claimed by something far older than fate. The shot did not come. The red targeting beam lingered at Ezio's throat, trembling slightly with the slow breath of the unseen marksman. The cathedral bells continued to toll, not in alarm, but in ritual, as if even impending death had been sanctified here. The air smelled heavier, thicker, as though reality itself leaned closer to watch. Ezio raised his hands with measured slowness, not in surrender, but in balance. Every movement was deliberate, each breath controlled. He could feel the angles, the distances, the metal beneath his boots, the air currents disturbed by the unseen rifle. Years of roofs and narrow ledges whispered to him how to vanish. But then the voice came again, closer now, no longer distant, through the scope. "Do not move." The figure stepped from shadow to half light. He was not a soldier. He was not a common enforcer. His armor was shaped differently, crafted like a second darkened skin rather than crude plating. The sigil upon his chest was a stylized eye pierced by a blade. His helm was smooth, featureless, except for a single crimson lens that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Ezio felt it in his bones. This one hunted men like him. Behind the figure, two more appeared. One carried a long, barbed staff crackling with restrained lightning. The other held a box-shaped device that hummed, lighting faint lines of pale blue across the floor. "In the name of the Holy Ordos," the first figure intoned, "you will submit to examination. Resistance will be considered confession." The word holy did not carry warmth, only weight. Ezio's mind moved faster than his body. He counted exits, measured the width of the bridge, gauged the wind rising from the cathedral censer chains. The bells created rhythm. Rhythm was cover. He moved as the bell struck. In the same heartbeat, the lowest toll rolled across the iron air. Ezio dropped backward, hands gripping the rusted railing. He swung under the bridge, boots hooking the edge, body vanishing from their line of sight as the rifle discharged. The sound was not like any weapon he had heard. It was not thunder. It was not crack. It was a tearing of air itself. The bolt passed where his skull had been, the air behind it screaming as if wounded. It struck the far wall and detonated, blooming into a sphere of white-hot annihilation that reduced metal to vapor. Ezio hung beneath the platform, muscles burning, fingers slick with oily condensation. The bell tolled again. He dropped. The fog caught him. Below, the haze was thick and choking, heavy with chemical rot and industrial decay. He landed on a lower platform in a crouch, silent despite the impact, cloak settling around him like shadow given form. He did not run. He vanished. The Inquisition moved above like a tightening noose. Boots thundered. Orders snapped through Vox. The blue scanning light washed over the fog, revealing nothing but grime and drifting ash. Ezio moved through the underhive like a memory of motion. He slipped through broken vents, crawled through maintenance ducts lined with flayed wiring, and wove through derelict habstacks where walls wept rust and ceilings dripped slow, poisonous water. Along the way, he saw more. Shrines filled with candles made of greasy animal fat. Skulls bolted into the walls. Servo skulls drifting through corridors, their eye lenses glowing faintly as they whispered silent litanies. Children huddled in corners, staring at nothing, already hollow. Faith here was not taught. It was beaten into the air. From far above, a different sound began to echo. Not bells, hymns. A deep, multi-layered chant, amplified and distorted, rolling through the bones of the hive. The words were warped by bad speakers and age, but the meaning pressed into his mind like a stamp. The emperor protects, the emperor endures, the betrayer burns. Ezio paused in a narrow corridor choked with hanging cables. The betrayer. Was that what they saw when they looked at him? Footsteps approached. Lighter, cautious. 3 figures moved into view, their silhouettes thin, armed with crude shock mauls and rusted pistols. Hive-gangers, desperate, hungry, They did not see a savior. They saw prey. The first lunged. Ezio's blade flashed once, twice, a whisper of silver in the dark. The bodies fell without noise, crumpling into the filth as though life had simply been withdrawn. The last one stared, eyes wide, lips trembling. Ezio touched the man's forehead with blood-streaked fingers. "Go," he murmured, voice softer than this world deserved. The man fled, sobbing, vanishing into the blackness. He heard it then. A different sound beneath the hymns. Whispers, not through air, through thought. A pressure at the edges of consciousness, like fingers brushing the back of his skull. Images flickered behind his eyes. Massive golden halls, a throne of machinery and bone. A skeletal figure robed in lightless fire, seated in eternal silence. He staggered. The whispers grew clearer. "You are far from home." The words had no language, but meaning bled through them. "You do not belong, not even here." The shadows thickened. The hymns grew louder. And from the darkness ahead, from a chamber lined entirely with flayed metal, another figure stepped forward. Not armored, not armed, but robed in black and crimson, face pale and scarred, eyes glowing faintly with psychic light. An inquisitor. "You feel it, don't you?" the man whispered. "The gaze of something far greater than us all." Ezio straightened slowly, blade hidden but ready. The man smiled thinly. "The God Emperor has noticed you." And in that suffocating corridor of rust, prayer, and bone, Ezio wondered if being hunted was worse, or being watched by a corpse god that had ruled a galaxy with unbearable silence. The Inquisitor did not raise a weapon. That alone unsettled Ezio. The man's robes were heavy with layered scripture, black trimmed with crimson thread, every hem inscribed with tiny litanies of judgment. A faint, bitter scent of incense and old vellum clung to him, carried on air that tasted of iron and ash. His eyes burned with a soft inner glow, the mark of a mind that had touched the warp and survived. "You walk like a blade that does not yet know who wields it," the Inquisitor said softly. "You kill like a man who remembers gentler worlds." Ezio said nothing. Silence was safer. Silence was power. Around them, the corridor pulsed with faint red emergency lights, bathing the flayed metal walls in the color of old blood. Servo skulls drifted above them, their lenses flickering, recording, cataloguing. "You are not warp-born," the man continued, stepping slowly closer. "And yet, you are not of Terra, nor of any registered world. That makes you interesting." The floor trembled, not the slow breathing of the hive, something heavier, something angry. A distant roar rose through the walls, followed by a rippling vibration that set dust and flakes of rust drifting through the air. Ezio felt it through the soles of his boots, like a heartbeat that did not belong to the world. The Inquisitor turned his head slightly. "They are purging the lower manufactorum," he murmured. "Occult infestation, chaos touched." Ezio's fingers tightened beneath his cloak. He had heard madness before. He had hunted it in men who called themselves gods. But this sounded older. The corridor burst open ahead of them. A wall of rusted panels tore outward in screaming agony. Metal shrieked. Rivets exploded. A cloud of dust and sparks swallowed the far end of the passage. From within, it came snarling laughter that did not belong to human throats. Shapes moved through the smoke, twisted, broken. Men and women stretched into obscene mockeries of themselves. Skin split by ritual scars, eyes glowing with sickly warp light, their bodies writhing with unnatural growths, horns splitting from foreheads, spines protruding through torn flesh, fingers fused into clawed talons, and between them, Skulls. Hundreds of skulls. Bolted to armor, strung on chains. Crushed beneath hooves of bone and iron. One of them saw Ezio. Its mouth open too wide. For the blood... The thing never finished the sentence. The Inquisitor's gesture was lazy, almost bored. The barbed staff in the hands of his attendant flared, and a bolt of caged lightning leapt through the air, tearing through the cultist's skull and turning it to boiled ruin. The others surged forward anyway. They always did. Ezio moved. Years of rooftop chases and silent corridors returned to him, but twisted, sharpened by the brutality of this new world. He flowed into motion, blade whispering into his palm. He ducked beneath a swinging chain axe, rolled across the slick floor, and drove his weapon up through the underside of a mutated jaw. The creature convulsed, black blood spraying across the walls. Another lunged. Ezio leapt sideways, vaulted off a hanging cable, and slammed both boots into its chest, sending it crashing into a cluster of rusted pipes that burst, spilling scalding steam. The air filled with screams, not just from the cultists, from the walls. The hive howled as pipes ruptured and ancient systems failed, releasing clouds of burning vapor and chemical rot. The smell was overwhelming. Burned flesh, spoiled blood, machine oil, and hot incense all choking together. A massive figure crashed through the cultist horde. Armored, horned, its torso a fusion of flesh and blackened ceramite, etched with blasphemous sigils burning faintly with inner fire. In one clawed hand it held a chain blade the size of a man, teeth grinding hungrily for meat. It bellowed, shaking the ceiling. Ezio saw the future of that moment instantly. He could not face it directly. He slipped into shadow, climbing along the wall itself, boots finding purchase in bolt holes and hanging cables as the creature charged past his previous position, its heavy footsteps cracking the floor plating. He dropped from above. His blade found a gap in the corrupted armor, sliding deep between warped plates and tearing sideways. The thing roared in pain, turning, but too slowly. The Inquisitor stepped into view. A bolt pistol barked once. The explosive shell struck the creature's head and removed half of it in a blossom of gore and warp light. Silence followed. The surviving cultists froze. And then they broke. Some fled, some wept, some laughed as their minds finally shattered beneath terror. The Inquisitor lowered his weapon. "You see now," he said quietly, looking at Ezio. "This galaxy does not wage wars of kings. It wages wars of rot and worship." He stepped closer. "You adapted quickly." Ezio did not lower his guard. "Because," the man continued, "you have the soul of a killer who understands purpose." Suddenly the walls shuddered again, far stronger this time. The floor tilted slightly. A low, grinding howl rolled through the metal as distant structural support strained. The hive was not just angry, it was wounded. From deeper within the broken chamber came a new sound, a whisper that was not air, a presence that bent the light itself, distorting shadows into writhing, twitching shapes. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "Something else stirs," he whispered. From the darkness, where the cultists had burst through, a shape began to emerge. Tall, too smooth, its outline flickering as if reality struggled to render it. Ezio felt cold grip his spine. This was not flesh. This was not machine. This was wrong. The thing's silhouette sharpened, and as its unseen gaze turned toward Ezio, he felt the truth settle into him like a blade between the ribs. This was not a war of men. This was a war against nightmares given form. And now he stood directly before one. The thing in the darkness did not walk. It unfolded. Reality bent around its outline as though the air itself recoiled from its presence. The walls behind it warped, metal stretching like softened wax, shadows blooming into wrong, spiraled patterns. It was tall, slender, and impossibly smooth, like a statue carved from living night. The Inquisitor's breathing changed. Not fear, recognition. "Demon host," he whispered. The word fell between them like a funerary stone. Ezio felt the creature look at him without eyes. He felt it taste him without a mouth. Its attention was pressure, cold, intimate, invasive. It slid along his thoughts, brushing memories of tiled rooftops, of warm sunlight on stone, of the scent of leather and oil in Monteriggioni's training halls. Its shape flickered. It laughed without sound. Ezio moved before meaning to, not toward it. Away. He ran. The Inquisitor did not stop him. The world narrowed to motion and breath. Ezio sprinted through sparking corridors as alarms began to howl through the hive. Red lumens flared into life, washing the walls in violent color. Klaxons screamed warnings that had been forgotten by most of the inhabitants decades ago. Behind him, something screamed that was not air, not metal, not flesh. The demon host's presence chased him like a shadow that ran ahead of the body. He reached a vertical shaft thick with cables and service rails and leapt without hesitation, catching a dangling chain and sliding down through clouds of steam and rot. The heat burned his hands. The stench filled his lungs. He landed hard, rolling across a chamber that felt different, cleaner, sharper. The walls here were not rusted. They were polished, cold, engraved with endless scripture and stylized blades. The floor was black stone, polished to a dull, lightless sheen. Tall arches lined the chamber, carved to resemble overlapping knives. He had stumbled into a sanctum. He felt them before he saw them. 6 shapes emerged from the stone itself, as silent as thought. Clad in matte black suits of carapace armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helms, their bodies moving with machine-guided precision. Their boots did not clang. Their weapons did not hum. They existed as absence. Every instinct in Ezio's body told him to vanish. Every part of him knew he had been found. The first struck without warning. A blow to the back of his skull with the butt of a weapon, perfectly measured to disorient rather than kill. He staggered. The second swept his legs. The third struck pressure points he had never known existed. Nerves flared, muscles locked. He fell. Blades hovered at his throat, his heart, his eyes. "Cease," a voice murmured. Not from the air, from everywhere. A tall figure stepped forward, cloak of shadowed synth fabric trailing across the stone. The helm it wore was shaped like a faceless death mask, etched with a single vertical blade mark down the center. "The anomaly is intact," the voice continued. "Good." Ezio struggled, but the grip on him was absolute, not brutality, precision. "You have walked through corruption," the figure said. "You have moved through heresy and survived. You have killed where even our shadows hesitated." The figure leaned closer. "You are not lost." A panel in the floor slid open. Chains rose. Not crude industrial chains. These were thin, elegant, humming with faint, restrained energy. They coiled around Ezio's wrists and ankles, lifting him from the floor with mechanical grace. He did not thrash. He did not scream. He observed. The chamber began to descend, silently. The walls above slid shut as the platform carried him downward through a perfectly cylindrical shaft carved from pure black stone. Engraved text blurred past. Verses of death, litanies of silence, prayers to the Emperor that spoke not of mercy, but of necessary extinction. Far below, light grew, cold, white. The chamber opened into a cathedral unlike any he had ever imagined. This was not worship of hope. This was worship of execution. Rows of dormant figures stood within transparent sarcophagi, their bodies pale and scarred, wired into machines that breathed for them. Blades hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. Servitors moved along the aisles, tending to weapons so fine they looked like works of art. At the center, a massive throne of black iron, and seated upon it, a man, not old, not young, timeless. His face was half hidden by surgical augmentations, his eyes replaced by mechanical orbs that rotated slowly, constantly analyzing. His hands rested calmly upon his knees, fingers long and slender, one tipped with the faint gleam of a retractable blade. "You are far from home," the man said. Ezio held his gaze, even as chains pinned him in the air. "You will not leave this place as the man you were," the figure continued. "You will not belong to yourself. You will not carry your old creed." The chains tightened, slightly, not pain, promise. "You now stand before the Officio Assassinorum," the man said quietly, "the hidden knife of the Imperium." Silence fell over the chamber. The sarcophagi breathed, the blades hung, the servitors worked. The entire world seemed to lean inward. Then came the question that struck Ezio harder than any blow. Will you die as you are, or be reforged into what this galaxy requires? And in that cathedral of perfected murder, Ezio felt the final echoes of his old life begin to tremble. Not yet broken, but already surrounded by something colder, vaster, and infinitely patient. Ezio did not answer at once. Chains held him suspended in the cathedral of knives, their faint hum vibrating through bone and marrow. Below him, servitors glided in ritual patterns. Above him, blades waited like a sky that had forgotten stars. The man upon the iron throne watched without blinking, the soft whir of internal augmetics whispering through the chamber. Death, Ezio thought, would be simple. Death would be clean. But survival had never been a gift. It had always been a choice sharpened through suffering. "I will not be owned," Ezio said at last, his voice steady despite the pressure coiling around his limbs. The man's expression did not change. "No one is owned," he replied. "You will be emptied." The chains reacted instantly. They tightened, not to crush, but to anchor. The floor split open beneath him, revealing a shaft of blinding white light. The platform beneath his boots vanished. Gravity took hold. He fell, but not into darkness, into light. He struck liquid, not water, something thicker, cooler, heavy with chemical presence that slipped into his pores and filled his lungs without suffocating him. He floated, suspended in a vertical chamber of translucent glass. Shapes moved outside, robed figures with surgical limbs, eyes hidden behind lenses, hands tipped with instruments that glittered with sterile hunger. His world shrank to sensation. Pain measured, cold, precise. Something pierced the base of his skull. The first scream died in his throat, trapped by calm that was not his own. Images flooded him, not memories, commands, killing angles, weak points in ceramite armor, Boolean kill patterns against tyrannid bone plating, anatomical structures of Xeno's forms he did not have words for. The information arrived not as knowledge, but as instinct, burning itself into his nervous system. They did not ask permission. They did not grant mercy. They rewrote him. Time ceased to behave properly. There were moments of awareness that drifted like islands in a sea of silence. He stood within a vast, empty chamber, blindfolded, barefoot upon a freezing stone floor. A voice spoke from nowhere. "Silence is not the absence of sound. a mechanical hum, pain along his spine. Silence is the absence of hesitation. A blade pressed against his throat. Silence is obedience without question. A distant scream, not his. He ran through corridors that shifted and folded, walls lurching into new shapes. Targets appeared without warning. Servo skulls, training servitors, flickering holograms of men, heretics, traitors, saints. He learned to kill without seeing, to hear footsteps through walls, to strike through darkness so complete it felt like burial. They starved him. Then they fed him chemicals that made his heart race beyond human tolerance. They drowned him, then taught him how to breathe through liquid. They broke his mind open and stitched it back with cold, perfect logic. And through it all, beneath the layers of implanted instinct and chemical obedience, his old self watched, silently, like a man trapped behind glass. The final trial came without ceremony. He woke strapped to a stone slab. The chamber was bare except for a single figure seated beside him. Not an interrogator, not a surgeon. A child, young, thin, scared. A thin restraint looped around the child's wrists. A knife lay between them. "You will be released," a voice spoke from hidden speakers, "when the blade is used." Ezio's muscles tensed against the restraints. The child looked at him, not with fear, with hope. "Please," the child whispered, "I don't want to die." Silence. 1,000 lessons surged within him. Protocols, purpose, necessity. The Imperium had no room for hesitation. Mercy bred weakness. Weakness fed heresy. Heresy destroyed worlds. The knife trembled slightly on the stone. The child's breathing quickened. Ezio closed his eyes. Somewhere, far beyond the walls of this temple, he remembered stone warmed by sunlight. The sound of laughter echoing through courtyards, his mother's voice, his father's hand on his shoulder, a creed that had once been shaped around freedom, not extinction. He reached for the blade. The restraints fell away. The chamber held its breath. He did not cut the child. He cut the bindings. The boy fell backward in shock. Alarm screamed into life. Red light flooded the room, washing everything in the color of condemnation. Automata fell from the ceiling like spiders, weapons unfolding, limbs unfolding, systems awakening. Ezio did not fight. He stood still. Guards poured in, blades raised, guns aimed. The man from the throne room stepped through the haze of light. He looked at the freed child, then at Ezio. For a long moment, nothing existed except judgment. Then the man spoke. "You have failed perfectly." The child was taken. Ezio was not executed. He was returned to the lightless depths. Days later, or years, he stood alone in a chamber of mirrors. Not true mirrors, but polished obsidian that reflected only distortion. His body had changed, subtle reinforcement at the shoulders, microscopic scarring along nerves, reflexes sharpened beyond memory. Something cold rose from his left wrist. A blade, not hidden, integrated, perfect. A whisper passed through his mind, not from machine or master. "You are no longer what you were, and yet you are not what we intended." In the silence of that chamber, as he watched his reflection flicker and fragment, Ezio understood with a terrifying clarity. They had not erased him. They had simply made him dangerous. And somewhere deep within the temple of the hidden knife, the Imperium had created something it no longer completely controlled. But once a blade learns, it can choose. Who truly can command its edge? Silence became Ezio's world, not the absence of sound, but the perfected control of it. Every movement had weight. Every breath carried purpose. The temple of the hidden knife no longer felt alien to him. Its cold walls, its endless corridors of shadow and scripture, had grown familiar in the way only a blade's edge can be familiar to a hand that bleeds. He was no longer tested. He was no longer broken. He was deployed. They dressed him in matte black sin skin, a second flesh that drank light. It clung to him like a shadow that had learned to obey. Over his heart, a small sigil was stitched in dull silver, a stylized blade crossing an unblinking eye. He did not ask what it meant. Questions had no place here. The chamber he was brought to was unlike the others. Smaller, sealed, its walls lined not with scripture, but with cogitator banks and scrolling data slates. At the far end stood 3 figures, their armor more ornate, their presence heavier. One spoke. "You now serve a hidden clade," the voice said. "Not Vindicare, not Calidus, not Eversol." A pause. "You serve us." The eye on Ezio's chest seemed heavier. "Our charge," the voice continued, "is not the alien, not the heretic, not the traitor in open rebellion." The lights dimmed slightly. We watched the watchers. Images flickered to life across the walls. Faces appeared, men and women in the black and crimson of the Inquisition. Some stern, some cruel, some hollow. "These are not targets," the voice said. "Yet." Ezio understood without being told. Corruption was not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes it wore sigils of authority and wrapped itself in scripture. His first assignment came without ceremony. A sealed transit vessel, sterilized, windowless, manned only by servitors and a single human pilot, whose mind had long since been reduced to obedient fragments. The destination was encoded directly into Ezio's neural implants. He felt the coordinates rather than saw them. An inquisitorial conclave. The ship descended through a storm of toxic clouds, landing on a world whose surface was carved into cathedral-sized bastions and fortress monasteries. The air outside tasted of acid rain and scorched stone. Wind howled like hungry ghosts through broken statues of angels with armored wings. Ezio moved through it unseen. Inside the fortress, the air was warm with recirculated breath and burning candles. Hallways were wide, carved from black marble veined with red, lit by flickering lumen strips. Walls whispered with embossed prayers. He reached the chamber by instinct. Inside stood a single man, an inquisitor, unarmored, bareheaded, old. His face lined not with cruelty, but with exhaustion. A data slate rested in his hands, glowing faintly blue in the half-light. Ezio felt the target marker bloom within his thoughts, but something was wrong. The man looked up. He smiled. "I wondered how long it would take," the Inquisitor said. Ezio did not move. "I counted the steps you took in the corridor," the man continued softly. "I felt the air shift when you entered the threshold. You wear silence well. But I taught men long ago how to die quietly." The air tightened. "So tell me," the Inquisitor said, "are you here because I am guilty, or because someone is afraid of what I have learned?" That was when Ezio felt the additional data unravel in his mind. Not part of the original briefing. Sealed, delayed, hidden even from the temple. This man had uncovered forbidden truths about the Inquisition's own internal purges, about silent wars waged not for purity, but for control. He was not a traitor. He was a liability. Outside the chamber, boots sounded faintly. A purge squad approached, not to support Ezio, to erase everything. The Inquisitor took a slow breath. "I never thought it would be one of your kind," he said, studying Ezio's stance, his stillness, the perfect readiness of death in his muscles. "A man who kills shadows." Ezio felt the cold pressure of the choice bloom inside him. No longer theoretical, no longer distant, immediate. He moved, not toward the Inquisitor, toward the wall. His blade slid free and cut the lumen strip in a single smooth motion. Darkness fell like a curtain. The first purge trooper entered, weapon raised. Ezio was there, gone, there again. Steel whispered, blood touched stone. The squad fell in silence. When the light flickered back on, the bodies lay arranged with terrible precision. The Inquisitor watched. "You chose truth," he said quietly. Ezio deactivated his blade. "I chose silence," he replied. They left separately. The fortress burned later that night. Official reports marked it as a chaos infiltration. The name of the Inquisitor was struck from all imperial record. Back within the temple, no punishment came. Only a new sigil etched beneath the first, a smaller, inverted eye. The Clade watched him more closely now. He felt it in the corridors, in the walls, in the way the servo skulls lingered slightly longer when he passed. He had crossed a threshold. The Imperium destroyed itself as expertly as it destroyed its enemies, and he was now one of the instruments that could decide which rot remained and which must be cut away. In the stillness of a lightless training chamber, Ezio stood alone, listening to the distant, endless heartbeat of terror itself. If even the Watchers could not be trusted, then who, in this galaxy of faith and fire, was truly beyond the reach of the knife? The assignment came as a whisper in the bone. Coordinates burned into memory. Mission parameters folded into instinct. A single directive threaded through thought like a strand of cold wire. Terminate contamination. The world that received him did not burn. It gleamed. From orbit, it appeared as a jewel of light cutting through the void. Vast continents of mirrored adamantium reflected distant stars. Towering spires of reinforced crystal caught the distant sun and fractured it into endless, blinding halos. This was not a world of rust and rot. This was a shrine. Ezio descended in silence, wrapped in the shadow of a vessel that made no sound, left no wake, and asked forgiveness from no god. The landing platform was a cathedral of glass reinforced by iron ribs. Servo constructs moved along rails beneath translucent floors, their forms made small and ghostly by layers of shining crystal. The air smelled of ozone and sanctified oils. Below, the shrine world breathed in quiet, regulated reverence. Pilgrims moved in orderly lines through streets paved with polished obsidian. Their robes were clean, their faces washed, their eyes lowered in disciplined humility. It was beautiful. That disturbed him. He moved through it unseen, heat diffusers muting his presence, Sinskin drinking the light that touched him. Beneath the path of pilgrims lay maintenance ducts and access corridors, designed not for servants, but for those who guarded the structure of devotion. His target was deep within the heart, a spire that rose far above the rest, its inner walls layered with stained, bulletproof glass that depicted golden hosts of saints, martyrs suspended in radiant agony, and the skeletal majesty of the emperor enthroned among stars. Inside, the air was warm and thick with incense. Candles flickered in their thousands, their flames unnaturally steady. Cenobite choirs sang, low, wordless tones that vibrated the air rather than filled it. Every surface had been touched by devotion. Ezio felt the marker awaken. He sensed the presence before he saw it. A man, a priest, robed in white and gold, bald, old. His spine reinforced by thin metal grafts that supported his bent frame. He knelt alone before a massive glass reliquary that hung suspended by chains of polished steel. Inside it rested a skeleton. Not human, longer, taller. limbs elongated and too smooth. Xenos, the priest did not turn. "You will not be seen here," he said softly. Ezio studied him. "You will leave no mark upon this glass," the priest continued. "No stain upon these floors." Ezio stepped forward. Still no reaction. "Good," the priest murmured. "At least the Emperor sends professionals." The marker pulsed. Terminate. Ezio's blade rose within his wrist, silent, perfect. "Do you know what that is?" the priest asked, gesturing faintly toward the suspended skeleton. Ezio did not answer. "It was found buried beneath Holy Terror itself," the man said. "Not in the open, not in the light. Beneath the oldest cathedrals, beneath the deepest foundations." The old man slowly turned his head. "It has never moved," he whispered. "Never breathed, never spoken." Ezio stepped closer. The priest's eyes were not afraid. "They ordered me to destroy it," the priest said. "Said it was heresy for such a thing to remain displayed. Said faith could not survive contamination." His old hands trembled slightly. "I refused." Ezio saw the data bloom in his mind. Denied in initial briefing, now accessible through deeper layers of implanted authority. The priest had not hidden the relic. He had petitioned to preserve it. Not out of rebellion, out of fear. Fear that faith built only upon lies would eventually crumble. "You came to kill me," the priest said calmly, "because I questioned whether ignorance is truly devotion." The cathedral sang around them, low, vast, endless. "Protocol," Ezio whispered. The word tasted foreign. "Yes," the man said. "Protocol." He looked back at the inhuman skeleton. "Tell me, killer of shadows," he added, "was your old world built upon blind obedience or quiet questions in the dark?" Ezio remembered the boy from the temple, the ropes, the knife. He remembered a creed built not to rule, but to resist those who did. The marker pulsed again. Terminate. Heavy boots sounded faintly outside. A patrol. Not for protection, for confirmation. He could hear their weapons charging softly. Time thinned. He stepped behind the priest. His blade hovered. The old man closed his eyes. Ezio did not strike. He moved faster than their sight. He slid past the priest, touched the reliquary with gloved fingers, and felt the faint vibration of an ancient stasis field. He cut the chain, not with brutality, but precision. The massive reliquary shifted, swung, and crashed gently into a concealed recess in the floor. He sealed it, hidden now, buried again. Then he turned. The patrol troopers burst in. 6 men in polished armor, faces hidden behind mirrored helms, weapons raised. Ezio was among them before they could register the change. Blades whispered, necks parted, blood kissed glass. When silence returned, the priest remained alive. He looked at Ezio. "Why?" Ezio considered the question. He deactivated the blade. "Because not everything hidden deserves erasure," he said. He vanished before the bodies cooled. Later, in the shadowed chambers of the temple, no one spoke of the relic. The report listed the priest as terminated. The contamination marked purged. The shrine world remained untroubled. And yet, as Ezio stood before the darkened walls of a silent training hall, he felt something unfamiliar take root within him. Not rebellion, not defiance, doubt. In a galaxy where truth was more dangerous than heresy, he had chosen not protocol, but mercy. And somewhere in the depths of the Officio Assassinorum, unseen eyes began to narrow. The knowledge did not arrive as data. It arrived as erosion. Ezio felt it first in the silence. Corridors that no longer sounded quite as empty. Walls that seemed to lean closer when he passed. Servo skulls that hovered a fraction too long, their lenses lingering with faint, predatory curiosity. The temple of the hidden knife no longer felt like home. It felt like a throat slowly closing. The truth began as a file that should not have existed. He found it nested inside a routine mission brief, buried beneath layers of authentication protocols and encryptions so old that even his augmented mind hesitated before unraveling them. It opened not with words but with images. 10,000 inquisitors, faceless, numbered, tracked, watched, killed, not by enemies of the Imperium, by the Imperium itself. Ezio's pulse slowed as the images continued to scroll across the inside of his mind. Planets labeled purged not for heresy, but for knowledge. Entire conclaves erased because they had learned too much. Silent wars executed in corridors of marble and in orbiting fortresses that never appeared in official records. The file bore a single sigil, the stylized, inverted eye of a hidden Ordos. The Ordos veil, the watchers of what must never be acknowledged. His next deployment came too quickly to be coincidence. A structure in deep void, black and unlit, orbiting no star, no beacon, no charted marker, only a coded vector pressed directly into his thoughts. He arrived within it not by docking, but by being swallowed. The interior was ancient, not rusted, preserved. Walls of dark stone etched with script so old they felt like geological features rather than writing. Torch braziers burned with colourless flame that gave no warmth. The air tasted like parchment and old blood. He was expected. A robed figure waited for him at the centre of a circular chamber. The figure wore no armour, no visible augmentics, only robes of deep grey, trimmed with silver thread that shimmered faintly in the half-light. "The blade that thinks," the figure said. "You are earlier than anticipated." Ezio did not respond. "You have seen fragments," the figure continued. "This place exists for those fragments." The floor beneath them shifted, stones sliding soundlessly apart to reveal a circular pit. Within it hung strands of light, hard, thin, bound, each holding spheres of preserved thought, memory, and crime. "Archives," the figure gestured. "Come closer." Ezio stepped forward. The nearest sphere opened. Inside it, a dying world, a planet of glittering cities, spires of crystal and gold, not unlike the shrine world he had walked. He saw it through another's eyes, an inquisitor's, a man who had found something buried beneath its crust, not heresy, not corruption, but truth. The truth that the Emperor had not always been a god, that he had once been a man, that he had chosen silence, not worship. The archive shifted. Fire washed over the world. Exterminatus. Billions died not because they had turned from faith, but because they had begun to understand. Ezio turned his face away, but the images did not stop. Another sphere, another truth, the golden throne. Not merely a throne, a prison, a machine, a cage holding a soul that was no longer fully human. The Emperor wasn't simply dying. He was being used. The archive closed. Silence fell. The robed figure spoke again. "This is the Ordos veil," it said. "We do not hunt traitors. We do not hunt heretics. We hunt those who step too close to the pillars that hold the lie together." Ezio felt the word settle heavily within him. Lie. "The Imperium does not survive by hope," the figure said calmly. "It survives by ignorance. Your kind exists to maintain that ignorance." Ezio's blade stirred slightly within his wrist. "And if someone chooses truth?" he asked. The figure turned its hidden face slightly. "Then they become a target, whether they wear your sigil or ours." The chamber trembled faintly. Ezio felt something else then, not from the room, not from the figure. A presence, older, Heavier. The pressure returned, the one he had felt in the hive, in the corridor of flayed metal. The gaze. The figure stiffened. "You feel it too?" it whispered. The light within the spheres flickered. The air thickened. Ezio saw it in the reflection of dark stone. Not a shape, not a form, but a distortion in the fabric of light itself. Something pressed against reality from the other side, a psychic rise of attention that bent shadow. "You are not meant to see this," the presence whispered without words. Ezio didn't tremble. He didn't kneel. For the first time, something within him did not feel fear, only defiance. The robed figure stepped back. "You should not have come," it whispered. "They will know." The floor sealed, the spheres dimmed, the torches guttered. By the time Ezio returned to the temple, no one spoke of the Order's veil. They did not need to. He felt it in the posture of the guards, in the silence of the halls, in the absence of routine assignments. He was being watched not as a weapon now, but as a possibility. In the solitude of a lightless chamber, he stood before a slab of polished black stone. The man reflected was no longer the assassin who had once moved across Renaissance rooftops. He was taller, quieter, colder. But behind that reflection, something burned. If the Imperium survived by lies, and if the Emperor himself was a prisoner of worship, then what was faith? And more importantly, what was he now meant to protect? The dreams began again. Ezio had not dreamed since the temple rewrote the edges of his mind. Sleep, when it came, had been a black and perfect stillness, like sliding beneath frozen water. But after the Ordos veil, the silence fractured. He stood upon stone warmed by sun. He smelled olive oil and dust carried by gentle wind. Monteriggioni. The old fortress village rose around him in memory, not as it had been in war, but as it had been in peace. Flags stirred. Voices drifted through the courtyard. The faint echo of steel on steel from young hands learning balance and restraint. He saw himself there, younger, unburdened, alive. He woke without breath. The temple ceiling stared down at him, cold and seamless. The air smelled of antiseptic metal and recycled incense. For a long moment, he lay still, letting the war inside him subside back into silence. But something had changed. The creed had not died. It had waited. He resumed his training as if nothing had altered. He walked the corridors with the same measured pace. He passed the same watchful servo skulls and the same silent sentinels. He accepted missions and executed them with cold, flawless precision. But now, he listened, not with his ears, with memory. The Officio taught annihilation as a sacrament. Each movement drilled into him was efficient, brutal, elegant only in how it shortened time between breath and death. Ezio began to adjust. He shifted angles of approach, altered timing, introduced hesitation not as weakness, but as weapon. Where the temple taught presence as dominance, he revived absence as power. Where they bred fear through brutality, he learned power through whisper. He was no longer simply an imperial blade. He was becoming something older. A mission came. A rebellious Hab cluster on a macro-forge world. Thousands declared heretical, chanting forbidden names, refusing tithe, refusing prayer. The usual solution was orbital fire. The Imperium had decided on exemplarity. Ezio infiltrated alone. The Hab cluster stank of recycled air and terror. Children clung to walls. Elders whispered prayers that did not sound like lies. No Xenos taint. No warp corruption. Only starvation. Only desperation. His target was a man who had begun to speak against imperial governors. Not a warlord, not a prophet. a quiet worker whose words had become too visible. Ezio reached him easily. The man was thin, hollow, shaking. His fingers trembled as he lifted them, not in threat, but in understanding. "They sent you," the man whispered. "I can see it in your eyes." Ezio said nothing. "Do they tell you we are monsters?" the man asked. "That we worship darkness?" Ezio's blade stirred. The man smiled weakly. "We only ask why our children starve," he said. Ezio ended it cleanly. When he left, the Hab cluster was not bombarded. Official reports listed the rebellion collapsed. He began to see the pattern. Where the Imperium saw heresy, there were only broken men. Where the temple saw targets, there were only truths that could not be allowed to breathe. And now, where Ezio had once served as simple executioner, he began to choose. The next memory came unbidden. Firenze, a church bell, blood in an alley, his father's voice. He remembered a phrase he had not spoken aloud in centuries. "Nothing is true, everything is permitted." But here, in the Imperium, everything was enforced, everything was chained, everything was defined. The old creed did not fit, so he forged it anew. Nothing is pure, everything hides a blade. He began to carve small marks into his armor, not visible to the eye, etched beneath plates, beneath sigils of the temple. Symbols of old Italy twisted, reshaped to survive in this dead future. A feather, a tower, a broken circle. Not rebellion, identity. He received a summons, not a coded mission, a physical instruction, an audience. The chamber was deep, silent, circular. The man with the iron throne waited once more, augmented eyes flicking softly as machinery adjusted without sound. "You have changed," the master of the temple said. Ezio did not deny it. "You hesitate," the man said. Ezio considered the word. "I calculate," he replied. A faint pause. The man's mechanical eyes narrowed. "There is a difference," he said. "Hesitation breeds corruption." "Blind obedience breeds rot," Ezio answered. Silence followed. Not anger, interest. "You are dangerous," the master said. Ezio inclined his head. "I was designed to be." Nothing more was said. Ezio returned to the halls, but he felt it now, not just eyes. Curiosity, caution, unease. He was still an asset, but no longer predictable. That night, he climbed to a silent upper sanctum of the temple, a place where no one trained and no eyes watched. The stone there was older, etched by forgotten hands. He placed his palm against it. The stone was cold. He whispered words that had not existed in any imperial lexicon. A creed for a galaxy without mercy. A creed for warriors who did not kneel to gods that fed on lies. A creed for a man who had walked across centuries and now stood within a future that could not erase him. Far below, terror's endless heartbeat continued, but somewhere in its shadow, a ghost was learning to breathe again, and as Ezio stepped back into darkness, he could not help but wonder whether the Officio Assassinorum had discovered they were not shaping a weapon, but awakening something far more terrifying than disobedience. A will that remembered what it meant to choose. The summons was different. There was no coded whisper in his bones, no slow bloom of coordinates behind his eyes. This time, the mission came with silence so profound it felt like pressure. Ezio stood alone in the arming chamber. His armor sealed itself around him with quiet, intimate clicks. The sinskin tightened, adjusting to his musculature as though breathing with him. Beneath the metal, his heartbeat was steady. Beneath the heartbeat, something colder moved. The name arrived last. Not a designation, not a file, a warning. Chaos Space Marine. He had killed men. He had killed monsters clothed in flesh. He had never killed a legend of hatred. The drop was violent. The sky above the war world boiled in red and black. The clouds twisted like wounded beasts, flashing with unnatural lightning that burned without thunder. The land below was torn apart by centuries of bombardment, a maze of craters, shattered cathedrals, and corrupted trenchworks lined with bones fused to rusted metal. Ezio did not land with troops. He landed alone. The ground shook beneath him as distant artillery thundered, shells screaming through the air like damned souls. The stench of warp corruption tainted everything. A sickly sweetness of rot, the copper tang of old blood, and an ozone burn that scraped the lungs raw. The presence arrived before the sight. A pressure behind the eyes, a weight in the soul. The warp bled here. Reality felt thinner, looser, as if it might tear by accident. Ezio moved through the destruction like a thought that refused to be observed. He passed corpses of Astra Militarum soldiers, frozen in expressions of terror so complete their faces seemed carved from grief. He stepped over broken bolters, shattered aquillas, snapped chains of useless prayer beads. He reached a structure that could not have been built by imperial hands, a cathedral of wrong angles and flayed stone. Its towers were twisted spirals of black iron and fused bone, reaching toward the sky like pleading broken fingers. Lightning gathered unnaturally around its spires, drawn to some unseen gravitational wound in the air. Inside it was worse. Walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. Scribbled runes burned and faded, their meaning pressing into the mind without permission. Chains hung from the ceiling, each link etched with screaming faces frozen in metal. Ezio felt him, the warlord. He walked deeper, stepped silent even here, even with reality protesting his presence. The central chamber opened wide, and the monster waited. The Chaos Space Marine was immense. Armor fused with flesh, ceramite plates cracked and swollen around bulging, corrupted muscle. Horns curved from his helm, crusted with old blood and newer rot. Chains hung from his shoulders, each bearing skulls that still wore expressions of agony. His blade was not a weapon. It was a wound. A chainsword longer than Ezio's body, its teeth emerged in blackened ichor, screaming softly as if eager to taste memory. The warlord turned, not slowly, instantly. "You are small," it said, voice like stone grinding through broken glass. "You are late. You are clean." Ezio did not answer. The air began to distort around the Chaos Marine. The warp responded to him like an obedient beast. Shadows twisted. The floor cracked, bleeding black vapor. Whispers flooded the chamber, not into ears, but into thought. "You do not belong. You are not of this age. You will break." Ezio stepped forward. The thing laughed. "I have killed saints," it said. "I have skinned prayers. I have heard the Emperor scream in silence." Ezio vanished. He did not dodge. He disappeared. He climbed the walls of wrong stone as if they were familiar rooftops. His blade flashed from his wrist as he struck downward, testing strength, finding weakness. The Chaos Marine moved impossibly fast, chainblade ripping through air that should have held only emptiness. They collided. The sound was not of steel. It was of concepts breaking. Ezio felt the force of the blow shatter the platform beneath his feet. The floor collapsed, dropping them both into a lower abyss, lined with broken statues of imperial saints that had been defaced, their faces replaced by screaming warp carvings. The Chaos Marine landed like a meteor. Ezio landed like thought. The warp thickened. Reality peeled. The air filled with phantasms, half-formed demons crawling through tears in the veil, their fingers stretching toward Ezio's mind. He felt claws brush his thoughts, felt alien hunger taste his memories. Monteriggioni, Firenze, the boy, the knife. He clenched his mind closed like a door barred from within. The warlord charged. Ezio slid under the blow, blade sliding free, striking again and again at joints, at corrupted seal points, at places where ceramite had split from rot. He was not stronger. He was precise. The Chaos Marine roared as Ezio climbed him, scaling armor as if it were broken masonry. The whip of the chain blade tore air inches from his spine. He drove his integrated blade into a crack beneath the creature's helm. Warp energy screamed, not pain, fury. The creature grabbed him. One massive hand wrapped around Ezio's torso. Bones would have broken if not reinforced. Muscles screamed. "You cannot kill the Eternal," the warlord hissed. Ezio looked into the fractured helm. "No," he said quietly, "but I can make you remember fear." He triggered the secondary function, a device implanted by the temple. Not a bomb, a breach. The air split. A localized tear in reality opened within the Chaos Marine's chest, dragging warp energy inward violently. The warlord howled, its own patron realm rejecting it. Ezio tore himself free and rolled, clear. The chamber collapsed. The Chaos Marine was dragged half into the Imperium, half torn apart by its own stolen power. It did not die cleanly. It did not escape. It was undone. Ezio climbed from the rubble as the warp scar slowly sealed. The whispers faded. The pressure lifted, but not completely. Something remained. Something had seen him. He felt it now, faint but certain, like a gaze following him from beyond the edges of thought. "You are not of this time," the whisper seemed to say, "and yet you walk in it so easily." Ezio stood alone amid broken saints and bleeding walls. For the first time, he had faced something born purely of chaos and survived by his own will. But as the last vibrations of the warp faded into uneasy silence, he could not shake the feeling that this was not a victory. It was an introduction. And somewhere beyond reality's thin skin, something vast and patient had taken note of the blade that refused to break. The order came wrapped in gold, not in the temple, not in shadowed corridors of knives and scripture, but within a chamber flooded by pure surgical light. A single hololithic image hovered before Ezio. A woman wreathed in luminous fire, her bare feet hovering inches above a blackened battlefield, her hands raised in silent benediction. An imperial saint, living. The impossible had become doctrine. Her name embedded itself into him like a splinter of light. Saint Verena of the Ashen Host. Designation, potential heresy, kill. The world that bore her was marked by ruin and pilgrimage. Once a manufacturum planet, now a shrine world born of war. Its factories were shattered into mountains of twisted metal. Its skies held the constant haze of burned incense and pollen from engineered memorial flora. The air carried the metallic tang of old battlefields and the sweetness of devotion. Ezio arrived with no escort. Saints did not receive fleets when death came for them. He moved through crowds of faithful who knelt in silt and ash, their foreheads stained with soot. Vox emitters whispered endless praise that fractured in the broken air. Braziers cast amber light across torn banners depicting the woman now destined to die. He felt her before he saw her, a calm in the noise, a warmth in the cold. She stood upon a broken statue of a fallen space marine, robes simple, face pale and unlined. Her eyes were not glowing. Her hands did not blaze with psychic fire. She was human, her voice carried without amplifier. "You walk with death," she said quietly, not turning. Ezio stopped. "You have since long before this century." He stepped forward. She turned. Her gaze fell upon him, unafraid. "You are not of this time," she said. "Not of this world. You walk stitched between ancient vows and newer chains." Ezio felt the marker awaken inside him. Terminate. "I was told you heal the wounded with a touch," he said. She inclined her head. "I do not heal," she replied. "I remind flesh that it still remembers how to live." Behind her, rows of wounded Imperial guards stirred. Men with shattered spines, women with burned lungs, children wrapped in stained linen. Many had not moved when Ezio entered. Now they breathed, not miracles, small survivals, hope weaponized. "Why am I here?" he asked. She looked toward the distant perimeter where the horizon burned softly with artillery fire. "They say I am too kind," she said. "That kindness calls weakness. That weakness invites corruption." Her voice never wavered. "They are not wrong about fear," she added. Ezio's blade whispered into his wrist. He activated it halfway. Its faint hum stirred a breeze in the foul air. Her eyes dropped briefly to his arm. "You have killed monsters," she said, "and you have killed men." She stepped closer. "You have killed truth," she said, "and you have protected it." Ezio's thought slowed. A choice widened. "You do not gleam with warp light," he said. "You do not reek of madness." She smiled faintly. "Nor should I." The sky cracked. Artillery lit the horizon with flickering fire. Chaos incursions at the outer reaches of the planet had begun to surface again. The Imperium's answer was already forming in orbit. Exterminatus protocols warming their cold, indifferent machines. The Saint knelt, not in surrender, in peace. "If you believe I am danger," she whispered, "then do what your world demands." One of the wounded men reached out weakly. "Saint," he breathed. She touched his forehead. He slept. No glow, no thunder, no miracle witnessed by history. Ezio moved. He did not raise the blade. He activated the assassination marker and felt it resist. Protocol fought with memory. Memory fought with identity. He remembered the priest in the Cathedral of Glass. He remembered the Inquisitor who had asked whether guilt was truth. He remembered the child. He remembered the knife and rope. Nothing is pure. Everything hides a blade. He deactivated his weapon. The Saint closed her eyes as if expecting it. When she opened them, he was already past her. He severed the vox pylon that broadcast her sermons. He rerouted the signal. He whispered into the machine through codes the temple never taught him. Compliance, corruption, warp bloom, false positives. He marked the battlefield as tainted, deeply. The sky responded. Clouds split open. Fire fell, not upon the faithful, but far away. The strike obliterated a corrupted cult enclave shipments engraved within his secret maps. The Saint rose slowly. "You spared me," she said. Ezio did not linger. "I delayed the question," he replied. He vanished into smoke as the first real shells began to fall. Later, in orbit, reports marked the Saint's location as compromised by potential chaos influence. Her survival was unconfirmed, her legacy contained, her existence converted into rumor. In the temple, questions were not asked, but eyes shifted. Data lingered. A living Saint left alive by an Imperial assassin was not mercy. It was precedent. Ezio stood alone in the silence chamber when the last transmission ended. The hum of Terra's ancient engines throbbed faintly through the stone beneath his boots. He flexed his left wrist. The blade rose. Perfect. Ready. But he did not use it. Something had shifted. Not in the temple. Not in the Imperium. In him. If saints could live without heresy. If truth could breathe without destruction. Then what, truly, Was he being trained to protect? And worse, what would happen if the wrong eyes had seen the same hesitation he had felt as strongly as he now did? In the endless silence of the Officio Assassinorum, Ezio felt something colder than death slide quietly across his awareness. He was no longer merely observed, he was suspected. Suspicion moved through the temple like a breath held too long. Ezio felt it in the way corridors seemed to narrow when he walked them, in the way training chambers emptied more quickly than before, in the way his mission briefings grew thinner, stranger, layered with silence where purpose once lived. He was no longer just a blade. He was a question. The summons came without herald, no coded whisper, no implanted directive. A physical door opened where no door had existed before. Beyond it lay a stairwell spiraling downward, carved not from metal, but from black stone so ancient it seemed to drink the light of the lumens that dared to illuminate it. Ezio descended. No guards accompanied him. None were needed. The air grew colder with every step. The hum of machinery faded until only the faint, distant heartbeat of terror remained. The walls changed, no longer bearing prayers or imperial sigils, but something older, deeper. Abstract carvings, concentric circles, fractured lines that didn't belong to any script known to man. At the bottom stood a door, not metal, not stone, bone. Massive, seamless, and set into the rock as though grown rather than built. Etched into it was no aquila, no skull, no blade, only a symbol that hurt to look at, its lines slightly shifting when not directly observed. The door opened, not outward, inward, like a mouth learning to breathe. Inside was darkness so complete it felt like weight. Then light bloomed, not from above, from within the walls themselves, revealing an impossibly vast vault. Pillars disappeared into a ceiling too high to matter. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting not Ezio's form, but false versions of him, slightly wrong, slightly delayed. The black vault. At the center floated a single object, a coffin, not a sarcophagus, not a reliquary, a device, suspended by fields of humming energy, constructed from blackened gold and ancient, unrecognizable metals. Its surface was etched with the same shifting symbol as the door. Ezio approached. Every implantation in his body screamed warning. He pressed forward. The closer he came, the heavier the air became. The psychic pressure he had felt, in the hive, in the war-torn cathedral, near the Order's veil, all of it gathered here into a suffocating presence that pressed against his soul like a hand too large to fight. The coffin opened. No hinges, no sound. It unfolded. Inside was a body, not human, not Xenos, something between, tall, slender, pale as carved marble. Its chest rose and fell in slow, unnatural breaths. Its eyes were closed. Its hands folded calmly over its chest as if it merely slept through an age. Ezio felt his thoughts stutter. A voice entered his mind. Not from the walls, not from the air, from the thing itself. So old, so out of time, so familiar. "You are lost too," it whispered. Ezio did not move. "You are a relic," he said aloud, though his voice sounded small in the vastness. No answer in words. Only pressure. Images poured into him. A time before the Imperium, before the Emperor's dominance. A secret war fought in shadow between beings who could bend reality as casually as men bend steel. Warriors who walked along the boundaries of worlds. Watchers, architects, prisoners. I was never a god, the thought pressed into him. Nor a devil. The vision changed. Terror, in an age when the sky was not choked by industry. Oceans clear, cities made of light and science, not rot and prayer, and this being, walking among them, A guardian, a judge, a knife. I was sealed here when the Emperor realized what I was. Ezio's hands tightened at his sides. Why show me this? He demanded. The being's presence grew more focused, sharper. You are a fracture, replied. A variable. You do not belong to this time. You are not written into their design. The pressure intensified. They fear you already. Ezio stepped closer to the coffin. The field did not repel him. It welcomed him. The being's eyes opened. They were not eyes. They were voids that reflected endless stars that had never existed. You have learned what they hide, it whispered. You have spared what they demand you destroy. You walk their halls as a blade that chooses. The vault trembled. The pillars hummed. Light flickered. Alarms, distant, muted, began to murmur through the stone. They will come for you soon, the being told him. Not to correct you, to erase you. Ezio thought of the saint, of the priest, of the child, of the inquisitor who smiled in darkness. What are you? He asked. The being's mouth did not move. A thought like cold starlight filled him. I am what remains when the lie collapses. The vault trembled harder. The fields around the coffin flared brighter. You can leave, the being said, and pretend nothing changed, or you can listen. Ezio felt the weight of a choice not placed in code, not implanted, not enforced, real, raw, alive. The alarms grew louder now, genuine concern threading their sound. He took a slow breath. He leaned closer to the coffin. Speak, he said. The stone doors above began to grind against their seals. Boots thundered faintly far above. Weapons primed. Machines awakened. And in the heart of the black vault, as the oldest secret of terror gazed into the soul of a man who had walked across centuries, Ezio realized that the Imperium had not made him their greatest weapon. They had given him access to their deepest fear. But was he strong enough to carry a truth so old that even gods had buried it? The first shot did not strike him. It struck the field. The invisible barrier around the coffin flared into incandescent life, absorbing the impact of the bolt and disintegrating the shell into a spray of harmless light. The sound of impact rolled through the black vault like a thunderclap that had nowhere to escape. Ezio turned. The door of bone had fully opened. They flooded in. Black armored figures poured down the stairwell, their movements precise, identical, their weapons raised with perfect synchronization. Their helms were smooth, expressionless, marked only by thin slits of crimson targeting light. Assassins, brothers, mirrors. The being in the coffin did not move. Its presence did not retreat. They have chosen, it whispered into Ezio's mind. The field around the coffin began to dim. Ezio stepped away from it, not in fear, in understanding. The lead operative raised a gauntleted hand. Subject compromised, the operative said through vox-filtered calm. Step away from the relic, kneel. Submission will be rewarded with termination privileges. Ezio straightened. He felt the blade beneath his skin respond to the shift of muscle. He felt something else as well. Memory. Not the temple's, not the Imperium's. His. You were not meant to reach this depth, another voice said. Your permissions do not exceed silent red clearance. Ezio moved. In one fluid motion, he dove sideways, disappearing into the shadows along the curved wall as the first wave of shots tore through empty air. Bolter rounds roared through the chamber, detonating against stone and flaring harmlessly against the fading field. He moved like he never had before, not as a temple creation, not as an imperial weapon, as a free will sharpened into motion. He scaled the pillar to his left, boots finding purchase on textured ancient stone. From above, he dropped between two of the operatives, blades flashing from both wrists. The hum was nearly silent. The cuts were not. 2 helmets parted. 2 bodies fell. The others did not hesitate. They had been trained for this. They adapted. Shots stitched the air where he had been. He was no longer there. He vanished into blind angles, used pillars and vault arches like rooftops and bell towers from a life that felt impossibly distant. He remembered every narrow ledge in Firenze, every stone seam in Venice's towers. This chamber was just another city of death. He heard a change in their communication. A typical movement pattern confirmed, one said. Unregistered combat doctrine. Ezio felt the pressure from the coffin surge. Do not die meaninglessly, the being whispered. Ezio rolled behind a collapsed section of floor as a grenade blossomed into white-hot silence, the explosion sucking sound and light inward rather than blasting outward. He emerged through the smoke, severing the power feed of one assassin's weapon before driving a blade cleanly through the neck joint. The floor trembled. More boots. He heard them above, heavy, purposeful. The iron hand of the temple. The master had come. A deeper voice rolled across the vault through external amplifiers. You have exceeded acceptable deviation. Ezio looked toward the stairwell. The shadow there was heavier. You have made contact with a thing that predates the Imperium, the voice continued. That alone merits erasure. Ezio stepped into the open. The remaining operatives aimed. But, the voice added, your survival has become a variable we did not predict. The master descended into view. The Iron Throne one. More machine now than man. His lower body was mounted into a floating bladed platform. His hands ended in segmented metal fingers. His eyes were no longer orbs. They were lenses. You were meant to kill without thought, he said, not think without permission. Ezio felt calm settle in, a clarity unshaken by their weapons. I do kill without thought, he replied. He turned his palm toward the master, and choose without chains. He triggered the charge, not the breach device, something older, something he had built himself. A localized blackout pulse, surgical in nature, designed to collapse augmetic coordination for a fraction of a second. The master froze, just for a heartbeat. That was enough. Ezio moved through the operatives in a cascade of precision. Not rage, not desperation, determination. He did not slaughter. He disabled, cut cables, severed joints, blinded optics, turned weapons inert in hands that had never failed before. By the time their systems rebooted, he was gone. He reached the lower edge of the vault, where ancient maintenance tunnels intersected with forgotten catacombs. He dropped into one without hesitation, letting darkness swallow him like an old companion. Behind him, the coffin pulsed. The being's presence brushed against his thoughts one final time. You have chosen to remember. Ezio did not answer. He ran, now hunted, now unaligned, now free. The tunnels narrowed, stone giving way to older stone. The sound of pursuit faded, but never fully vanished. Terror above him thrummed endlessly, unaware of the fracture moving through its buried arteries. He emerged not into light, but into forgotten air shafts that opened into the understructure of the imperial palace itself. Miles from the temple, miles from safety. He stood still in the dark, listened. He was no longer an asset. He was no longer a tool. He was an anomaly, a risk, a problem that would no longer be managed, only eliminated. And yet, as he flexed his wrist and felt the blade still answer to him and him alone, he understood something with terrifying clarity. The temple had not failed. The Imperium had not miscalculated. They had simply done what no empire of chains could ever prevent. They had given a man who once fought tyrants a reason to fight again. But now the question was no longer whether he could survive their pursuit. It was whether, in choosing to remember who he had been. He had just signed the death warrant of everything they were trying so desperately to preserve. Terror never slept. Beneath the imperial palace, beneath layers of sanctified stone and adamantine bone, the world existed as a system of veins and scars. Endless machinery breathed, groaned, and toiled. Prayers were recited by machines long after the men who built them had turned to dust. Ezio moved through its forgotten arteries like a thought that refused to die. He felt the hunt begin in earnest, not loud, not frantic, cold, calculated. The temple did not send mobs. It sent silence. He glimpsed them only in reflections, distorted shapes in polished steel, flickers of absence where presence should have been, faint disturbances in air that had been too long still. They were not desperate to catch him. They were patient enough to erase him. He surfaced miles from his last descent, climbing through a vent that opened into the lower cathedrals of Terra's underbelly. The air was thick with incense, sweat, and old stone. Enormous pillars rose like petrified giants, their surfaces etched with 10,000 years of prayer. Above, chanting rolled like distant thunder. Ave Imperator. Ezio blended with pilgrims. They would never notice him. Not because he was skilled, but because they were numb. Their faith had become reflex. Their lives had become ritual. He stood among them and felt the weight of the galaxy press against his soul. He remembered the being in the coffin, the guardian, the prisoner. I am what remains when the lie collapses. The thought settled heavily into him. The Imperium was not a god. The Emperor was not a savior enthroned by choice. The Officio Assassinorum was not a righteous blade. They were all scaffolding, holding up something cracked, something terrified of truth. A tremor passed through the stone. Far away, something woke. Not the Emperor, not chaos, something older. Legacy systems shifted. Ancient war engines turned slightly in their cradles, as if sensing a change in pressure that had nothing to do with physics. Ezio reached a high balcony overlooking a lower chamber the size of cities. At its center burned a fire that had never gone out, an eternal pyre beneath a statue of the Emperor that towered over millions of kneeling figures carved in stone. He looked at it, not with hate, not with awe, with clarity. He could run, vanish into the forgotten wastes of hive worlds, become a myth, a whispered cautionary tale inside the deeper ducts of the Imperium. Or he could become something else, a blade that did not kill for order, a shadow that did not exist to maintain lies. He touched the stone beneath his feet and felt its age, its pain, its obedience. I was never meant for this world, he whispered. The words did not float upward. They sank into the ancient stone. I was never meant to be your servant. The first of them appeared behind him, silent, efficient, a former brother, a perfect hunter. The assassin raised his weapon slowly. Ezio turned. They studied each other without hatred, without surprise. You are condemned, the assassin said. Ezio nodded. I was condemned before I arrived here, he replied. They moved at once. Blades flashed. Sparks kissed the air. Their motions mirrored each other so closely, it felt like watching a man fight his own memory. For every strike there was a counter. For every feint, a recognition. Until Ezio changed. Not his speed, not his strength, his intent. He did not strike to kill. He struck to end the cycle. His blade slid past the other's guard and severed a control line beneath the collar. The other assassin collapsed, systems shutting down in perfect, obedient silence. Ezio caught him, lowered him gently to the stone. "You were never free," Ezio whispered. He stood again. He felt more eyes on him now. Not just assassins, inquisitors, lords, machines that watched the walls instead of the stars. The Imperium's vast consciousness turning its head, slowly, toward an anomaly it could not name. And in that turning, in that shifting attention, something else stirred. Not from terror, from beyond, far beyond. A ripple through the warp. Not chaos, recognition. Something ancient knowing it was no longer completely buried. Ezio stepped to the edge of the balcony. Below him, a sea of people knelt in ignorant devotion. Above him, the effigy of a corpse god loomed. Behind him, death approached silently. He drew his blade. Not to fight them all, not to win, but to declare something that had not been spoken in this galaxy for 10 millennia. A creed, forged not in temples, not in palaces, not in vaults, but in a man who had crossed worlds and survived the weight of a future built on bones. He spoke softly, but the stone carried it. Nothing here is sacred. The assassins froze. The machines flickered. The air itself seemed to hesitate. He lifted his gaze toward the darkness above the cathedrals. Nothing here is beyond question. Wind whispered through broken arches. Candles trembled. Somewhere, deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the coffin in the black vault pulsed once, faintly. Ezio turned back toward approaching shadows, his stance calm, his blade steady. "I am not your weapon," he said. "I am not your ghost." He stepped into the darkness. "I am your reminder." His figure vanished among pillars and shadowed stone, not fleeing, not hiding, moving with purpose into the heart of the Imperium's oldest lies. And as the hunt closed in, as terror's ancient walls seemed to breathe in reluctant fear, a final thought burned within him, neither borrowed nor implanted nor commanded. If this galaxy only understood obedience or extinction, then he would become something it had not prepared for, a man who chose. And the endless night of the 41st millennium felt, for the first time in untold ages, the faintest crack in its iron certainty. But was that crack a promise of dawn, or the first fracture of an empire about to bleed itself into oblivion?